Imagine being born as a princess today. A life of luxury, royal ceremonies, cameras, and palace walls protecting you from danger. Now, imagine being born in ancient Egypt, 4,000 years ago. The palace is still there. The gold is still there. But instead of preparing for a royal celebration, someone places a bow in your hands. Outside, instructors wait beneath the Egyptian sun. Wooden targets stand in the distance, and soldiers demonstrate skills you would never expect a princess to learn. It sounds like fiction. After all, princesses aren't supposed to train with weapons. Or are they? Recent archaeological discoveries have challenged the image we've carried for generations. Royal tombs, unusual skeletal evidence, and carefully buried weapons have raised a fascinating question. Did some ancient Egyptian princesses receive weapons training? Or are we interpreting the evidence the wrong way? Let's step back 4,000 years and discover what history actually tells us.
When we hear the word princess, most of us imagine a life of comfort, luxury, and celebration. But in ancient Egypt, being a princess meant much more than wearing beautiful jewelry. She was part of the royal family, where every member carried important responsibilities. From a young age, royal daughters learned palace traditions, religious rituals, and how the kingdom was governed. Imagine growing up today as the child of a world leader. Your education wouldn't just prepare you for a comfortable life. It would prepare you to represent an entire nation. Ancient Egypt was surprisingly similar. Some royal women owned property, managed large estates, and held important religious positions. Their influence extended far beyond the palace walls. Which raises an interesting question. If a princess was trusted with so much responsibility, could her education have included skills that went beyond books, ceremonies, and royal etiquette? To answer that, we need to examine what archaeologists discovered thousands of years later.
For a long time, historians believed they already understood the lives of Egyptian princesses. Then, archaeology stepped in. Over the years, researchers uncovered royal burials dating back nearly 4,000 years. Among the jewelry and royal treasures, they noticed something unexpected. Some high-status women were buried with weapons. At first, many believed these objects were simply symbols of power or status. But later, scientists took a closer look at the skeletons themselves. Certain bones showed changes that may be consistent with years of repeated physical activity, particularly movements involving the shoulders and arms. Some researchers suggested these patterns could match regular archery or weapons training. It wasn't proof that these women fought on battlefields, but it was enough to raise an important question. What if at least some Egyptian princesses were trained for far more than palace life? To find the answer, we need to look beyond the tomb and into the daily life of a royal daughter in ancient Egypt. So, what would a normal day look like for an Egyptian princess? It certainly wasn't spent sitting on a throne all day. A royal daughter was expected to understand religion, royal traditions, and the responsibilities of the palace. She learned from priests, scribes, and experienced officials who prepared the next generation of the royal family. But some historians believe that education may not have stopped there. If the skeletal evidence truly reflects years of physical training, then at least some elite women may also have practiced activities that built strength, coordination, and discipline. Archery is one possibility. Weapons training is another. Whether these skills were meant for hunting, ceremonial duties, self-defense, or something else is still debated. The evidence doesn't give us every answer. What it does tell us is that some royal women may have lived far more active lives than the image we usually imagine. And that leads to an even bigger mystery. If weapons were more than symbols,
why were they placed inside royal tombs in the first place?
The deeper archaeologists looked into royal tombs, the more intriguing the discoveries became. Egyptians believed that death was not the end of life. It was the beginning of another journey. That's why tombs were filled with everything a person might need in the afterlife: food, clothing, jewelry, furniture, even personal belongings. So when weapons appeared beside some high-status women, historians began asking an obvious question. Were they simply symbols of royal status? Or were they objects these women actually knew how to use? No one can answer that with complete certainty. Some researchers believe the weapons represented power and protection in the next life. Others argue that when considered alongside the skeletal evidence, they may point toward real training during life. Either way, one thing becomes clear. The image of an Egyptian princess as someone who lived only in comfort is probably far too simple. But if some princesses truly received this kind of training, what purpose could it possibly have served in one of history's greatest civilizations?
If some Egyptian princesses really received weapons training, why? The truth is, no ancient text gives us a direct answer. Instead, historians must piece the story together from archaeology, artwork, and written records. One possibility is that archery and hunting were considered noble skills, suitable for members of the royal family. Another is that physical training prepared royal women to remain strong, disciplined, and ready for unexpected situations. Some scholars even suggest that growing up in the royal household meant understanding military life, even if a princess never fought in battle herself. Ancient Egypt was one of the world's greatest kingdoms, but it wasn't always peaceful. Borders had to be defended. Rivals challenged the throne. Power was never guaranteed forever. Whether these women ever used their skills in real conflict remains uncertain. But the evidence suggests that at least some princesses may have been prepared for far more than ceremonies and celebrations. And perhaps that's the biggest surprise of all. Not because they were warriors, but because they may have lived lives far more complex than the word princess makes us imagine.
So, let's go back to where we started. When we hear the word princess, most of us imagine luxury, ceremonies, and a life protected from danger. But ancient Egypt may have told a very different story. Archaeological discoveries suggest that at least some royal women may have received physical training and perhaps even learned to use weapons. At the same time, the evidence doesn't prove that they fought as soldiers. That's an important distinction. History rarely gives us every answer. Instead, it leaves us clues. A bow resting inside a royal tomb, bones that hint at years of repeated movement, and questions that scholars are still trying to answer today. Maybe the greatest surprise isn't that these princesses may have trained with weapons. It's that they don't fit the image we've created in our minds. 4,000 years later,
The gold has faded, the palaces have become ruins, and many of their names have been lost to history. Yet they still remind us of something important. The past is often far more complicated and far more fascinating than the stories we tell ourselves. And perhaps the next time you hear the word princess, you won't picture a fairy tale. You might picture ancient Egypt instead. If this journey into the hidden lives of ancient Egyptian princesses changed the way you see history, there's a simple way to keep exploring with us. Just hit subscribe so you don't miss our next journey.